than any member of this House could ever do. I appreciate so much the gentleman from Texas holding this hour. I'm privileged to have been a part of it. I did want to remind people what a train wreck looks like right before it happens. And with that mental image, I will yield back to the gentleman from Texas.
All right. Could I inquire of the Speaker how much time we have remaining in this special order?
The gentleman has 9 minutes remaining.
I have 9. Thank you. I thank the Speaker. I do want to, before I yield to Mr. Stockman, I want to apologize to the House for reading into the record comments from citizens of the United States exercising their First Amendment rights. One of those citizens made a disparaging remark about the President of the United States, and we understand that members ourselves cannot personalize these issues. Some of our citizens that are commenting don't understand the rules, but I do, and I want to apologize to the House because I do understand the rules. With that, I want to yield to Mr. Congressman Stockman, 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to recognize the fact that we're talking here today about things that impact our nation, and I want to talk about our Speaker. Who, as you know, or many of you know, I voted against and didn't want to be the Speaker. But now today, our Speaker has been vilified after offering opportunity after opportunity to negotiate. The President, on the other hand, said he's not willing to negotiate with our Speaker. The Speaker grew up in Ohio in a working-class community, and has negotiated many times with the President. So it's most puzzling to me why now the stance of no negotiation. Every time we had a shutdown, which I was here in the last shutdown, we negotiated. The President at that time, President Clinton, negotiated. All the shutdowns, we always had negotiations. That's the way this body works, is that we work on compromise. Now, the President wrote a letter to this individual who's the head of Iran. He's negotiating with the head of Iran who wants to eliminate eliminate Israel. He's willing to negotiate with him for nuclear weapons. The President also wants to negotiate with the head of Syria. This individual gassed his own people, tortured his own people, and killed his own people. I don't understand why he's willing to negotiate with him, but he is. But again, he's not willing to negotiate with our Speaker. Next, the President is also willing to negotiate with the Taliban. The Taliban, the President ordered the release of several prisoners prior to even negotiations to get to, quote, the negotiating to start. Again, let me remind the body that the Speaker is not to be negotiated with, but the Taliban is. Now the President says, I'm willing to negotiate if you give up your position. Well, that's not negotiation. There's been, I'd like to show you, Mr. Speaker, some of the words that have been used against our Speaker and the Republican body. We have been called by this administration terrorists, anarchists, suicide bombers, blackmailers, fringe, extortionists, ideologists, gangsters, extremists, bomb strapped to their chests, guns held to their heads. We're not talking about the terrorists who the President's negotiating with, but we're talking about the working class gentleman from Ohio. I call on the President to tone down the rhetoric. I call on the President to respect this body and to negotiate in good faith. It's time to end the government shutdown, and let's do it in a positive manner. And I'd like to point out, too, while these names were hurled and insulted to the Speaker, never once has the Speaker ever used that kind of terminology against our President. So I'd like to see this body turn down the rhetoric and get back to the business of negotiating and making compromise. It's the fair thing to do. It's the proper thing to do. And I just appeal to the nation and stop using this kind of rhetoric against people in this body. We deserve better. And with that, I praise the gentleman from Enos, Texas, for allowing me this time to speak to unify the body and to negotiate in fairness. And we ask the President just to sit down. By the way, Mr. Speaker, we've appointed conferees to negotiate. To this date, they never have shown up on the other side. We can't negotiate unless there's someone else. Anybody in the family knows it takes a husband and wife or spouse or partner to make a deal. It takes two people. We can't do it unilaterally. With that, I yield back the balance of my time to the gentleman from Enos, Texas. Thank you.
I thank Congressman Stockman. Can I inquire how much time remaining?
The gentleman has 2 minutes remaining.
2 minutes. Then I yield myself the rest of the time to end. Mr. Speaker, first of all, thank you for listening as we have this special order. We appreciate your courtesy. To my friends in the body, this is a serious issue. Obamacare, or the Affordable Care Act, as I said at the start, is a huge new entitlement. At a minimum, we should have a real debate about it. As has been pointed out, it barely passed the House on a partisan vote, no Republicans voting for it. And some Democrats, I think, voted against it. I think it passed by 1 or 2 votes. It passed the Senate only because they were able to get around the 60-vote requirement to end debate. So it is the law of the land, but it was passed with all Democrat votes and no Republican votes. And before it is fully implemented, I think it is worthy of a debate, and it is worthy of the type of situation that's going on now. And as I said at the top of this special order, if the Affordable Care Act is such a great thing, let's make it voluntary for the next year and let the American people choose whether they want to implement it as it's currently structured. And if they don't, let's work together, hopefully on a bipartisan basis, Mr. Speaker, to change it. No one wants the federal government to shut down. That's obvious. The Republicans in the House are bringing bills to the floor on a daily basis to try to open up as much of the federal government as is possible. Our friends on the Democrat side some days are with us on that and some days are not. They were with us today on paying furloughed federal workers when they come back to work. Hopefully next week they'll be with us on paying the veterans, opening the VA, the national parks, funding cancer research, and some of the things that earlier this week they were against. And with that, Mr. Speaker, again, thank you for your courtesy, and I yield back the balance of our time.
The gentleman yields back. The chair lays before the House an enrolled bill.
H.R. 3095, an act to ensure that any new or revised requirement providing for the screening, testing, or treatment of individuals operating commercial motor vehicles for sleep disorders is adopted pursuant to a rulemaking proceeding and for other purposes.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3rd, 2013, the chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gohmert, for 30 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. An information that came out after close of business yesterday is a report from CNBC about the 99% of Obamacare applications that hit a wall. This report said as few as 1 in 100 applications on the federal exchange contain enough information to enroll the applicant in a plan. Several insurance industry sources told CNBC on Friday. Some of the problems involve how the exchange's software collects and verifies applicants' data. It's extraordinary this is a quote, "It's extraordinary that these systems weren't ready," said Sumit Nehawan, CEO of Infogix, which handles data integrity issues for many major insurers, including WellPoint and Cigna, as well as multiple Blue Cross Blue Shield affiliates. Experts said that if healthcare.gov's success rate doesn't improve within the next month or so, federal officials could face a situation in January in which relatively large numbers of people believe they have coverage starting that month, but whose enrollment applications have not been processed. It could be a public relations nightmare, said Neil Wan. Insurance have told his company that just 1 in 100 enrollment applicants being sent from the federal marketplace have provided sufficient verified information. The article goes on to point out one insurer reported a better but still stunningly low rate of enrollment applications containing enough data to process coverage. It's about half of what we received, a source at that insurer said. We're getting incomplete data, about half the applications we haven't been able to process, who used the term corrupted to describe the batch of applications received. So the article goes on to point out what a huge problem, after 3.5 years to get ready for Obamacare to be the law of the land, after repeated refusals to negotiate whatsoever on delaying anything except for what the President has signed in the way of exemption and waivers hundreds of times himself, as he and Chief Justice Roberts completely rewrote the original Obamacare bill. There has been a refusal to allow everyone in America to stand on the same fair, level playing field as the friends or supporters of the presidents have gotten through their waivers of exemptions, including people in Congress, which many of us here in this body have refused to accept if Americans don't get them as well. One person in the article said he blamed the exchange's software, which is allowing too many people to finish the process online without making sure they provide answers needed by the insurers processing the applications. But the article also mentions there are going to have to be people go back and try to get information from these individuals that did not complete the application process, it sounds like through no fault of their own, just for the impropriety of the software programs themselves. And it's not difficult to see what a nightmare that will be, as it opens wide the door for identity thieves to start making calls or sending emails telling people they did not adequately complete the process and they need this information or that information. It's going to be tough for people to know. Am I sending information to the government, or am I sending it to a proper contractor, or am I sending my information to an identity thief? The process was not ready for prime time, and it's just going to get worse as we move toward January and the problems that are occurring. Here's an article from Dr. Susan Berry. This was dated October 3rd, talking about Secretary Sebelius. The woman who is behind the controls of Obamacare was unable to convince even one person from Kansas, the state she used to govern, to sign up for it. Though HHS Secretary Kathleen Sebelius is the former governor of Kansas, Representative Tim Huelskamp was informed by an insurance provider in his home state that none of the 365,000 uninsured people living there successfully signed up for insurance on the Obamacare exchange on the first day. Now, in the midst of all the chaos, all of the broken promises where people have lost their insurance, they have lost the coverage they had even when they keep their insurance. Insurance prices have spiked for the vast majority of Americans in this country. They did not get the $2,500 cheaper insurance the President promised. They either lost their insurance altogether or it has spiked dramatically. They didn't get to keep the doctor. We're hearing from those people constantly. And at the same time, when here in the House we have sent compromise after compromise before the shutdown occurred down to the Senate, which normally in a functioning Senate would have the Senate, if they didn't like what we proposed, send back an alternative. And at that point, after an alternative is passed in the Senate, then the Speaker can appoint negotiators called conferees. The head of the majority in the Senate, Harry Reid, could appoint negotiators. And they come together and they work out an agreement, and then that comes to the House and Senate for an up or down vote, non-amendable, straight up or down vote in each House. But the Senate was playing games. It is now clear that there was no intention of having any agreement, that the conventional wisdom in this town for the last 3 years saying that, gee, if there is a shutdown, then Republicans will likely lose the majority in the next election. So whatever it takes to shut down the government, go ahead. That was borne out by the fact that the first 21 mainstream stories completely faulted the Republicans, failing to point out the compromises that were sent down the hall and the Democrats' refusal to even entertain them. And then on the 4th, the ultimate capitulation said, all right, basically, we're appointing conferees. Just appoint people to sit down and talk about it. We can probably have this worked out by morning. But it was clear they wanted damage from a government shutdown. We've learned that as these telltale signs emerge, and one park ranger was quoted as saying that it was disgusting, but as park ranger they'd been instructed to make life as difficult as possible for people. We're getting stories in from around the country about how this abusive federal government that wants to tell you what health care you can have, what surgery you can have, who wants to supervise everything about your private life. They want every page of every medical record about you they can get their grimy hands on so that bureaucrats can decide if you're doing something they don't like, how to jerk you around, as the IRS has been caught doing now. As we've gotten reports of other agencies, whether EPA, FEC, others, being abusive. And we find case after case now, since the shutdown, of this government funding park rangers to go out and create as much chaos for Americans as possible. We have this administration where the buck stops with the commander-in-chief, who has now made clear to Catholic chaplains of the military that are independent contractors that you are not to show up and conduct Mass on Sunday, and if you do, you may be arrested or subjected to disciplinary action. There was a time in this country when we believed in volunteerism, where no matter what happened, Americans would step up and make sure things that needed to happen actually got done. And now we have an abusive administration so intent on, as the park ranger said, making life as difficult as possible for people in such a mean-spirited way, they would go shut down facilities that don't take a dime of federal money just to hurt as many people as possible. And those same people that are calling those shots want to decide what you can have in the way of health care, Mr. Speaker. No, thank you. I am opting out. I will pay the penalty. I am not going to have the government telling me what I can or cannot have. I'll pay the penalty. I'm waiving the subsidies. If Americans can't have it, why should we in Congress? That same spirit of entrepreneurism prevailed in 1995 when the Grand Canyon was actually shut down. It's amazing this administration had tried to pay for some kind of screen to put over the top of the Grand Canyon so commercial airliners can't fly over and look down and see God's creation. But in '95, there was an agreement between the state, local government, and the federal government to make sure that after it was initially closed, it reopened, and state and local government people were able to allow Americans who had scheduled their vacations, their travel time, allow them to enjoy that. Not this administration. Oh, no. They are so intent on refusing to allow even a delay across the board to be given to everyone as they've given to big business, to their cronies, that they are not going to allow any local government, private business, states to reopen parks and things that have no business being shut. The stories are coming in of all kinds of places. There was no need to close. There was no need to spend money to barricade, but just to make life tough for Americans, because this is how big government has grown. This is how big government has become, how abusive government has become. And I can't help but draw the conclusion that since Lois Lerner was never actually punished for the abuses and the obvious lies that have now come to light, that others in the federal government have said, well, they didn't do anything to Lois Lerner. She got caught red-handed, so we can be abusive to people as we want. So a story from October 4th that talks about how Arizona Governor Brewer, local businesses, local governments are trying to get permission to fund the reopening at least part of the Grand Canyon. But this federal government, like the park ranger said, want to make life as difficult, want to create as much misery as possible. I'll say this about the Carter administration. I was in the United States Army at Fort Benning for over half of the Carter administration, and we had a lot of misery as a result of the calls by the Commander-in-Chief then. And there came something that was called the Misery Index to measure how miserable Americans were under President Carter. Because we were having inflation, which is now coming under this administration because of the massive creation of money. You can't keep creating money and not end up causing inflation. That's coming. Interest rates, they keep being teased that they're about to go higher. We'll see. And the unemployment rate was massively high back in those days. But I'll say this about the Carter administration. They didn't mean to cause that much misery. They really did not mean to cause that much misery. There was massive misery across the country back then, but at least that administration did not intend to make people that miserable. But reports continue to come in of the misery this administration is inflicting because they can, because they want everyone to succumb to what has been classified as Chicago-style thuggery, that having more to do with tactics of organized crime. If you didn't go along with what they wanted, they made you suffer. And we're seeing that. I mean, for goodness sakes, we passed a law before the shutdown. I've been pushing for a military pay bill for over 2.5 years. And I'm very grateful the Speaker finally brought that to the floor. I'm grateful to Michael Kaufman for shepherding that. And then the Department of Defense gets it. We were going to mitigate as much as we could. To the Senate's credit, they passed that before the shutdown. But then the Department of Defense, this administration, chose to interpret it so much more narrowly than the law itself said, that they furloughed lots of people, just like the park ranger said, trying to make life as difficult as possible. And said, well, we're going to take some time to read the legislation and let people suffer for a while, and eventually we'll get around to deciding whether or not we think Congress meant to do what they said they meant to do, and that is protect our country, provide for the common defense, make sure our military continued to get paid, along with every private contractor that supported them in any way, along with every civilian employee that supported them in their role. They just apparently wanted to make life miserable. There's enough problems being created by Obamacare and by the overspending of this administration without creating things unnecessarily. Here's a story from Stephanie Condon from CBS News about Obamacare marketplaces raise data security concerns. That is continuing to be a concern and seems to be borne out that this was a train wreck. It is a nightmare, and that will continue to just get worse. Then the LA Times had a story from Chad Terhune. California Exchange overstated its web traffic for Obamacare launch. That would be consistent with so many of the mainstream that grabbed a hold of a young man who said he had signed up successfully. So he was hailed, he was interviewed by different media, and then come to find out actually he is a played computer hack who gets paid by Organizing for America, President Obama's lobbying group that he funds. Just the guy's paid, as he admitted he's paid to go online and just say things politically supportive of the president. Turns out he had not actually successfully signed up for Obamacare. There's a story from Andrew Johnson with National Review. 0 enroll in the new Louisiana plan on Obamacare's first day. One from the Weekly Standard, October 3rd, the White House on number of enrollees in Obamacare. We don't have that data. AP reports that pressure continues to mount to fix the health insurance exchanges. Those continue to be a nightmare. And in the midst of all this, where you had Franklin Roosevelt say, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, we have John Harwood with CNBC interview this week saying to the president, quote, Wall Street has been pretty calm about this, unquote. And the president said, quote, this time I think Wall Street should be concerned, unquote. So we have to fear the president making people fear. It was an interesting online entry this week indicating at the World War II Memorial on the Mall in Washington, where veterans have been staging protests to keep it open, Washington Examiner's Charlie Spearing reports that at least 7 officials were dispatched Wednesday morning to set up a ring of barricades to block tourists from the memorial. That's 2 more security officers than the State Department had in Benghazi a year ago on the night of the terrorist attack that killed 4, including the U.S. ambassador. Well, as I keep going out to the memorial each day to make sure veterans are getting in that care to, I've noted there are more Park Service people out there than I've ever seen at the World War II Memorial. I've been there all day, all times of the day and night. I don't sleep that much when I'm in Washington, and although we've come to find out our park rangers don't know the law, they don't know the parking law properly, there's a lot of things they don't know. We find out they've been instructed to make life as difficult as they can for people, and as the ranger said, that was disgusting. Thank God there are some people that I've met and spoken with the Park Service that care about the veterans. We have veterans that serve in the Park Service who just want people to enjoy their parks, not to make things difficult. But I'm seeing more Park Service personnel around the mall than you ever see out there around the World War II Memorial. Each time the last few days I've been out there across the street, you see mounted Park Service people on horseback, watching over things, keeping an eye on the veterans. You know, those guys in wheelchair from World War II, they may make a run. They actually try to go down the sidewalk where they're not allowed. It is outrageous what this administration is doing. The Breitbart article by Mike Flynn points out the Obama administration has decided to block access to public memorials on the National Mall as a result of the government shutdown, like its decision to end White House tours when the sequester cuts took effect. There is no rational reason for this. The park police, nominally in charge of monitoring these spaces, isn't even affected by the shutdown, but they're shutting off access to these sites. It's gratuitous and petulant. Another article about the Obamacare privacy nightmare. Shutting down the cemetery at Normandy for people that have spent so much, saved so much, trying to get a family member there to see the graves they never saw of people who fell while serving with them at Normandy is about as outrageous as it gets. For heaven's sake, yes, make life miserable for members of Congress, but for Pete's sake, leave our veterans alone. Let them enjoy their memorials. Let them have their times of silence and meditation at their memorials, at their cemeteries. There are private entities, there are local governments, there are state governments wanting to keep these things open. But I can tell you, any administration that is so calloused that it would allow and encourage difficulty for its citizens when it has a tantrum and doesn't get what it wants is not somebody you want in charge of your health care. Every American ought to be seeing this and ought to be saying loud and clear, let's hold up for at least a year on Obamacare. You've done enough damage already. We don't want you controlling our health care. At least give us that break. We're here this weekend. Would have been nice to be back in East Texas. Would have been nice to be at the events that I was scheduled to be in, different places this weekend. But we're here. I have no regrets. I just hope that the Senate, Mr. Speaker, and the administration will decide that negotiating means more than calling a press conference and announcing that we're willing to work things out. Because when the President announces we're going to work things out, we're willing, and he calls the leaders of Congress up to the White House so that he can announce to them in person that we're not negotiating. I just wanted to make that clear. You give us everything I want. You abdicate, forget the Constitution, forget your requirements, that you appropriate the money, you go through, you have oversight, you make sure we're not wasting money, forget your obligations under that. Give me all the money I had last year, don't put anything on it, just give it to me like I want it, or we're not negotiating. That is not an administration you want in control of your health care. And Mr. Speaker, with that, I'll yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
At this time, I would ask that we do now hereby adjourn.
The question is on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Accordingly, the House stands adjourned until noon on Monday next for morning hour debate.
And the House wrapping up the session for the weekend on this 5th day of the federal government shutdown. Today they worked on 2 measures, retroactive pay